are these people?
I want to bring another one, Ricky Hale, over at Council of State Media, 2024 honoree for Best Outlet. One of them. All right. Gaza's double standards show everything we were told about Western democracy is and was a lie. We are seeing a massive effort to suppress the truth and quell dissent. Like we just saw in Switzerland even. It's not even stretching. It's even extending beyond the U.S. and Great Britain and Israel, where they're trying to put a lid on it. Everywhere else around the world, they know the truth. And that's why they've all come to the UN and raised their hands to stop the genocide and call it a genocide and tell Israel to stop. What Ricky says is, if you want to know how institutional racism works, consider that Harvard Medical School canceled a class in which its students would have met with patients from Gaza. The excuse was given that the meeting would have been biased towards the victims of genocide because it would have been one-sided.
God forbid we're biased towards the victims of genocide. God forbid.
Well, if they were Jewish, it would have. Now, here's the thing. In order to not be one-sided, the class would have had to let Israelis explain why they really wanted to maim those Palestinians. Instead, Harvard decided it was best for its students to simply not learn about wartime healthcare. They just had to accept being less educated to avoid upsetting Zionists. In an email from medical school dean George O. Daly, class of 82, read, quote, "We are committed to exploring the most educationally rigorous means to teach and learn about the impact of war on the delivery of health care and on the health of affected populations, and to do so in a way that does not divide members of our community who hold disparate views." Huh? After the class was canceled, ready for this, the organizers planned to host the event as a student group, but they weren't allowed to do that either. What? Yeah. Just imagine telling a student group they weren't allowed to meet with Israeli patients. It would never happen, and anyone who suggested it would probably be fired. Given that Harvard admitted the reason for dropping the class was to avoid polarizing the school's affiliates, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest they have Zionist backers, like Bill Ackman.
Yep.
They probably own shares in the arms manufacturers supplying the IDF too. Remember that Jeffrey Epstein gave massive endowments to Harvard as well. Funded tons of science programs there. In case you didn't know, centrism means finding a middle ground between the victims and the perpetrators of a Holocaust. Inclusivity means pretending the concerns of both sides are equally valid, then silencing the victims so no one hears their concerns. That almost sounds like a Laura Kay line, so I'm not going to out Ricky there, but if the problem was the panel had only included Palestinian patients and not Israelis, they could have had a panel that's representative of the casualty rate in this war, quote unquote. That would mean about 1,000 Palestinians for every Israeli. We could let that one Israeli tell us that the other 1,000 panelists deserve to be maimed, and we could call them anti-Semites, and if they disagreed. I mean, that's just how we operate in the West now, I guess. That's how Piers Morgan operates, at least. The Harvard story is just one example of the effort the West is going to in order to suppress awareness of its war crimes in Gaza. Backflips. Over in the UK, things are somehow getting even worse. As we reported earlier, the British state has been smearing anti-genocide protesters, so it has an excuse to shut down their marches. One such example was a protest outside the BBC, which was stopped due to the police's abuse of the Public Order Act. As we said earlier, the protest was planned in response to the BBC's shocking Gaza coverage, which has been repeatedly called out by whistleblowers like Owen Jones. Police approved the protest to take place before Christmas, only to ban it due to non-existent quote-unquote security concerns. Weird. They rescheduled the protest for January 18th, only to backtrack because the synagogue was located, like I said, about a mile away from the march route. The route was then reversed, and the march was delayed to avoid clashing with the Sabbath service, but even that wasn't enough. police decided the only way to protect the synagogue was to stop protesters going near the BBC?
Yes.
Okay.
Can't have that.
Police cordoned off the road so protesters went as far as they were allowed to go, and in a shocking act of terrorism, they laid flowers, like I said, among them Jeremy Corbyn. And, oh, look, there he is right there. Where's Jeremy? Where's Waldo?
Terror. Terrorism. Terrorist.
I should have had this earlier. Police ushered the protesters into Trafalgar Square and kettled them in, then selectively arrested whomever they wanted. Their prize targets were 2 elected members of parliament, John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn again issued the following statement on Twitter, which has been backed up by journalists, eyewitnesses, and camera footage. Quote, I was part of a delegation of speakers. Again, we read this earlier. Metropolitan Police falsely accused him and John McDonnell of breaching the cordon, which they had not, after ushering them through, and they interviewed them under caution. The fear is that they will now use the Public Order Act to ban them from future protests, something they've done to other protesters, which we read from the guy who spoke to WSWS anonymously the other day. The claim was that protesters somehow posed a threat to a synagogue that was more than a mile away. The truth is that police ushered Corbyn and McDonnell through the cordon to set them up. It reminds me of the time Starmer set up Corbyn by helping him word a statement and then suspended him for making that statement. British politics is so unbelievably despicable. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, is the former leader of the opposition, and in 2017, he came within 2,000 votes of becoming prime minister. If he had won, we would not have spent the past 15 months supporting genocide. I don't think he would have been prime minister this long from 2017 to 2022 or 2024, but okay. The establishment is trying to punish Corbyn for being on the right side of history, just like he was all those years ago when he spoke so powerfully against the invasion of Iraq. If the British establishment hates one thing more than anything else, it's peacemakers that call out their lying and their warmongering. It's worth mentioning the protest ban was opposed by more than 1,000 Jews, including rabbis, but clearly they were the wrong kind of Jews and should be ignored. Again, very Laura-esque. I feel like she had a hand in writing this. Pathetically, the Met argued in a statement that they act without fear or favor, as though they're boldly standing up for the little guy against the powerful when they're doing the exact opposite. Ask yourself, the last time police rounded up Zionists for cheering on Israeli war crimes. Because that happens. You would think, given that we're a bastion of free speech and democratic values, the British press would be outraged by this blatant attack on our freedoms. Instead, they've been cheering it on.
You think so?
Because everything we've been told about Western democracy is a lie. What a shock. Police have been abusing the Public Order Act to ban people from attending future marches because the most important thing during genocide is that you'd stop people speaking out against it, right? Well, if you're the U.S. government, if you're the British government, the government's strategy is to quell all dissent because despite its best propaganda efforts, it has failed to win over the public. Disturbingly, police are now arresting the anti-genocide candidates who stood against Labour at the last election. This also follows a spate of arrests of anti-genocide journalists, and if you're still struggling to understand why our freedom-loving democracy would act in such an authoritarian manner, this might help. And again, talking about the Ministry of Defense meeting with the Israeli guy, Declassified UK confronted the soldiers, got that whole John McAvoy thing in it there that we talked about earlier. If we had a functioning press in the UK, they would ask the questions that Alex Morris asked, but the reality is that if any journalist did, they'd be fired. While it would be fine to speak to, say, a Russian general in this way, you simply aren't allowed to speak to an Israeli this way. You're supposed to show them deference. There's now every chance that Alex Morris will be harassed by British police for doing journalism. I would not at all be surprised if his home is raided in the near future, because that's just where we are. It's fucking terrifying. And I hope that doesn't happen. But support Ricky, support Council of State Media. Love these guys. Give them a shout out, big shout out. They do great work. All right. They have the Anti-Imperialist Nexus. Their podcast, Socialist Voices, reads the articles right there. Normal Island News is part of Council of State Media. You know, I adore Laura Kay. She's one of my favorites also. Yeah, awesome people. Awesome outlet. Big fan. That's that segment right there. So we definitely don't get monetized for stuff like that. So if you are able to and of means, we could really use your support. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. If not, share the stream. Tell your friends. The way that you can support this network financially the best and leave us a tip would be to give us a Cash App that takes no fees or very minimal fees whatsoever. Ko-fi takes almost no fees whatsoever. PayPal is small. And then you could also subscribe to the INN newsletter. That uses Stripe, and we talked about Stripe last week. I'd prefer that we not use Stripe if we didn't have to. But whatever you guys are, whatever everyone is willing to do, guys, ladies, everyone, for real, thank you. Really appreciate all the support we could possibly get.